One of the problems with proof of work is that of the energy consumptions. I think the idea is really cryptography behind it that gives that security level versus proof of stake, which, when we look at what is our TVL, it's a little harder because we're a proof of work and not a proof of stake, and there's not as much staking, but we're also looking to build out opportunities to do that.
Annelise Osborne is the Chief Business Officer at Kadena, a proof-of-work L1 founded by two ex-JP Morgan blockchain engineers. With EVM compatibility, 25 live chains, and a $50 million grants program, Kadena is scaling a new standard for institutional-grade DeFi.
And I think what we're seeing right now is a lot of consolidation generally among crypto companies. I also look at Washington, D.C. and what stocks people are buying.
What are they buying? Give us the alpha.
Robinhood, Circle now, and the...
Today's guest is Annelise Osborne, the Chief Business Officer at Kadena. Kadena is a layer 1 blockchain built on proof of work, not proof of stake, and was founded by Stuart Popejoy and Will Martino, who also helped build JP Morgan's first blockchain and the SEC crypto group. In recent weeks, its token has expanded to 25 chains, and its Chainweb EVM testnet went live with over 50 projects committed to building on it, as well as also having a $50 million grant program. There's a lot to talk about, so I'm excited to have Annelise on today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Jacquelyn. Thanks so much for having me here. It's great to be here.
So excited to have you. I also always love to start having guests kind of explain a little bit about yourself. How did you even get into this space? Why Kadena? We can go from there.
Sure. Trying to keep it quick. So I did TradFi for a long time. I spent 12 years at Moody's running structured finance, commercial mortgage-backed securities within structured finance, which was interesting at the time because it was kind of innovative forms of financing because it decreased interest rates, because it decreased risk on banks' balance sheets, what have you. So I always like the idea of what can be innovative, right? In different ways. And so I left there and I kind of was looking for something more startup like, working with private equity, family office and hedge funds, starting up business lines. So it wasn't as small. And then I did a lot of corporate governance work, and I was asked to join a task force for regulations of ICOs at the time. And I was familiar with the idea of an ICO. I didn't really know what it was. But for me, I did so much homework and I understood blockchain technology. And then I recognize there's so much benefit that this can bring for finance. And so my whole thing was, how can we use blockchain to upgrade finance? I don't think it's broken, so I don't look at it as a huge displacement. I just look at it as how can we make finance better and faster?
Yeah.
If you look at the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, for example, right? So it's already been happening. So the New York Stock Exchange used to be like shoulder to shoulder, and now it's empty. And so it doesn't mean that stocks aren't being traded. It just means that we're using technology to do that. And I think blockchain is the next iteration.
I bet you were so busy during that ICO era.
Well, it was really working with a bunch of lawyers, and it was kind of understanding
So
the
the
idea of
lawyers
how
were
can
busy.
regulation
Yeah.
be hard.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting to try to figure out like what's the security coming from a very traditional background. How do we have people are paying for all of this, but they don't have actually access to owning the company. And so it's the idea of like versus an IPO, which is when a company is much greater and revenue generating, that you get a share of the company, and an ICO you get the idea behind it. So it was interesting. I mean, there have been very successful companies that ICO'd. There also have been companies that tried to be successful that didn't really work out, and then there have been bad actor situations. So
Of course.
it's across the board.
Right. Yeah. I also think what you said about the New York Stock Exchange, kind of like the differences between like then and now, it's like people are just doing it on their phone. They don't need to call in to like buy or trade or anything like that. I mean, you still can, I think, but it's just so different the way like technology evolves.
And the next generation, if we think about kind of like, I'm old, but like millennial and Gen Z, like everything is wanted to be on your phone, right? Like
Yeah.
I cash checks on my phone, which is kind of funny that why would I get a check, which is another thing, but like stable is that. But just the fact that we can do like investments on our phone and everything is digital, why should we have to wait? So I really feel like that's one thing that companies have to pay attention, and they can't be left or they'll be left behind.
100%. I mentioned Kadena in the intro, but very few chains are proof of work. We've got Bitcoin, Litecoin, Kadena. Uh, why did the team decide to go this route, and why do you think it's significant?
Sure. Well, also think about, Ethereum was proof of
Initially,
work
yes,
before
yes.
stake, right? And so When Stuart and Will were at JP Morgan and they founded the company, they had created JP Morgan was a private chain, and they left and wanted to create a public chain, and there's a lot of benefits to the security of proof of work, and one of the problems with proof of work is that, of the energy consumption, so they were looking both to solve the energy consumption issue, and so they created a chain, like a web of chains, and instead of all of the nodes kind of combating to actually try to solve the cryptography puzzle, it actually ends up getting allocated. So it is definitely less, energy than other proof of works. I think the idea is really cryptography behind it that gives that security level versus proof of stake, which, when we look at what is our TVL, it's a little harder because we're a proof of work and not a proof of stake, and there's not as much staking, but we're also looking to build out opportunities to do that. So, we're working to build out an active DeFi ecosystem. I started last year. I think, Kadena had previously been around and they have great tech, but hadn't really focused on growing as much, had focused more on building innovative technology that was super interesting. But now it's how do we build that and apply it to the market and how do we kind of grow from there? Um, yes, so proof of work is just something that we believe in, that we think institutions as well, and I think that there's definitely a market for it and a world for it. There's also going to be I think there'll be multiple chains, and there'll be multiple chains for different things.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
so yes.
So about a year in, what has it been like?
So yes. So I also had not been I mean, I was one of those people that we all look down on now that were like, I'm blockchain, not as much Bitcoin. But the idea was when I started and I had, a failed startup in 2018 and 19, but it was wild. It was a wild, we accomplished so much. We just are not still around. Um, it was more focused on how do we upgrade financial markets. And so I did that. I worked at Arca in their lab and institutional labs. We had created a money market fund before Franklin Templeton, Wisdom Tree, BlackRock. But we were also a startup. And so it was harder for us to kind of generate assets under management. They're doing great now. They just launched a new program and project. Um, I then left to write a book. So I wrote this lovely book called From Hoodies to Suits.
Oh my gosh, I love
But
that.
that was really focused because it was after FTX and it was after Luna. And I thought there was an education problem, and so I thought, well, why don't I focus on, building out education so more people understand it, so it's not really an issue, of the risk people within banks and institutions, understanding why this technology is good for them. But when I finished with the book, I really wanted to think, how can I make a change? And so I thought I can make a change either from the tech side or from the institution side, because there's a price to doing innovation. And so how can you generate revenue is very difficult kind of for startup companies, especially in this space, and kind of decentralized. If you think about the idea of a blockchain, there's not a lot of revenue generation from it.
Yeah.
So it's hard kind of in those in between startups. And I talked to an institution, and then I decided I would rather be on the tech side. And so I had this great opportunity. I had a couple calls, but I really like Kadena, and I like Kadena because I thought they're really smart tech guys, and they're super open to having someone come in and help build it out. And so it's been great. It's been a whirlwind of a year. I wish that we could move faster. So we're definitely building out both the crypto ecosystem. I also love I'm a huge believer TradFi and DeFi will merge. So I actually really appreciate all of the hoodies aspect that I've learned so much and so much more about both technology and crypto. So we're building out the crypto ecosystem with the DeFi ecosystem. We're building out kind of product and different projects that we need, and we're also building out the labs and tokenization. And so I believe that the institutional side will actually really most everything will be tokenized. And
Mhm.
so people won't talk about it. It will be underneath the layer that it's just, a bond is a bond, or this is digital money. We don't have to think about it being on something complicated from a technology perspective. So yeah, it's great. We're becoming EVM compatible as well. And so that is partially since EVM is such a standard, we have 20 non-EVM chains, and then we are adding on additional EVM chains.
Yeah.
So, so we're growing so much. We have custody, we have stable coins, we have DEXs coming in, we have lending protocols coming in, we have our first bridge went live. We've got a bounty on it, so that actually is still around, and it's been 3 weeks. So I think that we can start really just using the bridge. It's the first of many. So, Yeah, we're really excited. It's a little slower than like technology takes a while because you want to get it right and you want to go out the door with the right product as opposed to um, any concerns of security.
No, of
So I'm
course.
super excited. It's going to be it's been great building, and this will be a great delivery year.
Yeah, that's something we've talked about with a lot of guests on the show in the past is like the need for speed, but also making sure you're doing it right and that it comes with the security factors and, all the right certifications and everything, all the ducks are in order essentially. So it's like a balancing act between two sides. But you also mentioned institutional adoption, and that's something we talked about a lot on the show too, is like the institutions are coming in and it's probably to an extent. I don't think they're all coming in, they're all like, "Take our money," or "Bring it all on chain." I think there's definitely ones that are experimenting with it, like you mentioned, BlackRock, Franklin Templeton, other ones on that category. But from the conversations you've been having, what do institutions want to do, and what are they still like, "No, thanks. We could just do this the old school way."
So it depends kind of on the mentality of who it is that you're speaking to. So I think there's a lot of people that say it's not fixed. We don't need to. Sorry, it's not broken. We don't need to fix it.
Right.
And then you have kind of the other side of like we should pay attention to what like where are we going, not where are we today, but where is the world going. So there also has to be a need to either make money or save money, right? There's got to be some financial benefit here. So I think there's huge back office benefits, but there's a cost of getting it up. And not everybody wants to be the first mover. So I do think there's places to be first mover like the ETF world. I think that's good to be first movers or early adopters because there's so much money and they kind of go to the first movers generally or historically they have um, but not necessarily in all markets. I think also one of the issues in the United States is the lack of clarity of regulation, and so you can't work. You can't work in the gray. Like institutions see black and white. They need to know what's going on. I think MICA has been good in Europe about defining things. I think it's happening in the U.S. I think that especially with this new administration and the SEC and other regulators actually spending more time trying to get to understand it and figure out how can we work with innovation. Innovation is very difficult to regulate because it's continuing to grow. Um, so I do think institutions want to pay attention. I was at Davos this year, and all of the banks and asset manager CEOs all mentioned tokenization, which is interesting because the year before it had been AI.
Mhm.
And so everyone's paying attention, but not everyone's kind of building as quickly. I think use cases, stablecoin. I know that you've heard that before, but like stablecoin is such a great use case because you can save money. It's fast, it's faster, cheaper, more secure. Um, and there's automatic benefits for kind of cross-border transactions and payments. So I do think that is a big step. I think if you look at the repo market, for example, and collateralization, I think that some banks like that's what JP Morgan does a lot of internal use with their internal block or stablecoin. They're able to save money on that. I think there's projects like Figure out there that can have shown you can save a lot of money from the debt perspective. I think it's I forget how many like 85 basis points I want to say on deals, which is actually a lot. When you're dealing with
With
huge
massive
numbers.
amounts, yeah. Mhm.
And so those are all different ways to save money. I think on the other side, from a making money perspective, you look at the next generations with millennial and Gen Z actually getting the majority of the world's wealth because it's going from the baby boomers and it's a pass down. I think the mentality of how a lot of them work and will work is digital. I think a lot of that will be kind of backed by more blockchain. And so kind of thinking about where, this is the whole where are we going? A lot are not going to use the same financial advisors than their parents did, and there was a recent study that came out on this that corroborates that. Um, and so how do we target this new group? And so part of one of the reasons that some of the funds are tokenized, one, you can save costs on it, but two, it also allows you to reach new investors. So you'll find some of the asset managers going to different blockchains, and so it hits their communities. And so I feel like that is one step kind of on the front office of making money about, what can we do there? I do also think you'll be able to do smaller deals with tokenization. If you think about money that's been saved from doing tokenization of funds, if you think about sometimes there's that kind of small to mid-sized deals that nobody wants to touch because you kind of have the institutional ones. But I think that there'll be much more efficiency there too. I think the world is so much more private from from an investments perspective. There's fewer public companies today than there were I think I forget the number. There's like almost half as many from like 1996 than there. And so if you look at the private markets, they've totally gone up. And so I think the same will happen with debt. I think private markets tripled in the last 10 years. And so I think you're going to see the same with debt. And to get in the if you think about it, DeFi is like, private debt. So I
Mhm.
do think those tokenization will help make these much more efficient, and they will bring access to other investors through different kinds of tokenization. So I feel like I've been rambling, but I'm super excited about all that we can do. With that's not even having like, if you think about smart contracts, like what smart contracts can do, like they make things so much more secure. You can have your KYC AML lists. You can, cut out certain countries if they have sanctions against them that you can't trade there. You can, if you're, it can pay out what needs to pay out, as in like, if you think about a bond or any sorts of debt, it pays out interest, so you can pay out, conditionally even. So I'm super excited about where we'll get. It's just a matter of how do we get there. So I think that's getting people comfortable from education, it's having regulatory clarity, and then it's figuring out how blockchains interact with the institutional technology, and then also the worlds of blockchain interacting with each other.
Mhm. No, that all makes sense to me, and that's exactly why we had you on, to ramble, so you do not need to apologize for that. Literally, the more a guest talks, the better, and you were not rambling, don't worry. But, you know, given your title, Chief Business Officer, I want to kind of pick your brain on, like, what is the business side of building out a blockchain? I know, there's, like, so many BD people in the space, but, like, you were above that in, like, terms of scale and, like, the operations and everything that you do, right? So how do you kinda think about scaling Kadena and also, like, you talked about before, like, revenue generating chains, which is also, like, definitely a narrative that's been, like, picked at in the space because a lot of these chains don't generate revenue, right? So do you think about that? Is that part of your job? And then also, like, how do you think about scaling it from a business perspective?
Sure. I am always thinking about all of these things.
Yeah.
So first when I started, I wanted to figure out like what do we have? Where are we now? And so it was really looking at all of the activity on chain, kind of the grants we'd historically given out to, and then how do we want to build out an ecosystem? So I think that we really need to focus building out kind of the crypto, I'll call it the crypto ecosystem, just because it's, we need to have stable coins, we need to have enough wallets, we need to have institutional grade wallets, we need to have lending, we need to have, which can be centralized exchanges and decentralized exchanges. We need to have um, interoperability. So we need kind of the bridges in that world. Like, what would you need to have a functioning ecosystem? We're also actually even stepping back. We have our packed smart contract language, which we created really for financial settlement. So the idea was it was kind of that lawyers could read it and that it was set up for business and finance. And I do think crypto really is finance for a lot of what it is there, since business oriented. Um, I think we have three different types of clients, and I look at them as clients because I think that our job is to provide for them. One is the community members, so people that are, really pro Cadena, which is obviously, we're in crypto and we're about community. The second is developers. So developers kind of who's building on chain, who has projects, what have you. And then the third I look at is issuers. Issuer is kind of really in the TradFi sense, but issues are dApps. They're any companies that are coming in to build. So they all kind of cross over because a lot of times the community are developers mainly, right? But then are they issuing? Are they building out a company or like anyway? So those are the three, and I feel like they each are different targets. Like they each are talked to differently, right? So one is building out the ecosystem. I think building out the ecosystem is really important for any other community, so they have activity and things to do. And then two, developers, how can we reach out to them and help, bring them in? And then issuers, how are we attractive to like recognizing what we need? And that's really the grants, right? I feel like that kind of hits grants. So we have that crypto side. We've launched a product side too. The product is really developers, right? And then we're launching out kind of the BD lab side, or our Kadena Labs, which is really focused on tokenization, and that can be anything. That's not all just institutional. So it's not just finance. though a majority of it ties back to that. So we have tokenization of funds. We're bringing in debt tokenization. We're working with digital product passport, which is a regulatory aspect in Europe that's requiring. It's in essence an NFT that kind of tracks the product's life cycle, right? So where it came from all the way through, which is super interesting because I taught a class at FIT, which is the Fashion Institute of Technology,
Yes.
has a blockchain
That's so
class,
interesting.
and I was very surprised. They were using my book in their syllabus, so thank you.
That's
And I
amazing.
went in to talk to them because I hadn't thought about blockchain for fashion or kind of brands. And it turns out most of them are actually using NFTs for counterfeit. They
Mhm.
just don't talk about it as much. It's not as big, but if you kind of I did a lot of research because I went in to teach this class. I was also very worried about what to wear because I'm not very fashion forward, but that's another story. So anyway, so this digital product passport for Europe, we're working with the Croatia Football Federation for their fan engagement token. And so no people don't know, similar to Boomtag for digital product passport, they don't know they're using blockchain. They have all these capabilities when they kind of sign up, and it gives them a lot of access. There's a lot more kind of engagement from actually the federation to their fans. And so there's a lot of things outside of just, stablecoin and dexes and things.
Yeah.
That said, I'm super excited to kind of build out so much more from the traditional world in tokenization because we'll be able to use that as collateral. And I really do believe TradFi and DeFi will merge. So I would love to have the ecosystem that really encourages and propels that forward. So you also asked about business. So that's what I'm
Yes.
trying to build out. I'm also trying to make sure that we have the product is great techs and tools, right? And then also the idea of standardization within EVM to have that added in. So I feel like how do we create a robust ecosystem? And I am happy for people to give me ideas and feedback because I am not always right. But so I also really keep a very open mind and I'm always reading and trying to I watch lots of podcasts. I watch yours, and others out there reading news about what's going on and how can I learn. From a business perspective, where are we going to go? Kind of outside of our treasury, like thinking about how can we find revenue generating opportunities. So I would say that I'm looking at investing in certain projects. We're probably a little less investing in funds and just in the sense that that ties money up and it's not as focused as necessarily on ecosystem building, but finding projects that make sense. We have our $50 million grants program, which you mentioned.
Yes.
Some of that could go into equity if the if it makes sense and it aligns with how we want to build and grow. So I think that's one thing. Also, y- y- ideas of um, revenue generating opportunities outside of just equity and funds. So I am looking at those as well.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. On the $50 million grant program, what are you hoping to achieve on that front? Are there certain types of projects that you'd like to see built, whether it's like DeFi, infrastructure, dApps, DEXs, probably all the above, right? But for you
Yes.
personally, like what's most interesting?
So kind of different hats at different times too. I really want to build out the ecosystem. And so where we have gaps, right? I'm a huge believer that where we have gaps and things that make sense. We're working on privacy. Like we've got a lot of privacy projects we're working on internally. I think that like what are kind of next steps and where do we see the industry moving? That's something that we're working on. Little less sexy, but definitely Dexes. We're working on Dexes, bringing Dexes lending protocols right now is something that we didn't have enough of, and also bringing in the right wallets. So some of that's integration, which is not necessarily a grant for building, but it's also to bring in projects that make sense. Again, we were a non EVM on our
Mhm.
chain web chains, and so not everybody knows Pact, and so there was a cost to integration that was a little higher than for example our EVM integrations are. Um, Definitely kind of building out all of this ecosystem. We want more bridges as well. So bridges, there's a cost to build. Um, Definitely lending protocols and debt from the TradFi side as well. So there we have fund tokenizations. We have like kind of what I mentioned before. We have debt. We have
Mhm.
uh, different supply chain, like just general supply chain. There's invoice factoring that goes on there too that actually can decrease the cost of funding because you're using stablecoin, even though even though the people in the front don't realize they're using it, it's just a more efficient system and it costs less,
Mhm.
really because it's stablecoin and not traditional funding in banks. So really anyone that has real kind of ideas, it's not ideally, it's not to just find people that are looking to skip around and get grants. We're really looking, trying to figure out how can we partner and grow with whomever it is we're working with, because we recognize it's a business. Like it is a business for us, even though the idea is to build a decentralized world. But it's also a business for whoever's coming in.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so, like, how can we make those? How can we make those fit together? Like, I don't want to promise something we can't deliver. I recognize we are small, but we're mighty, and we really have great plans on our tech, our offering, and kind of the brain trust at the company itself.
No, 100%. You brought up the decentralization factor, which is, kind of at the core for hopefully most of the blockchains out there. But then there's also the reality of like there is a team behind it that wants to grow it and scale it. How do you kind of like balance between those two and really like allow for the blockchain to expand, in its own decentralized way, but also while like navigating the ship, so to speak?
True, I feel like it's in the beginning where you're like, you have your baby and you help to teach them to walk
You're
so they
hand
can go
holding
off
it.
and do their.
Yeah.
So, I do feel like there's a lot of that hand-holding to begin with, and making sure that we have the right projects together to build out that ecosystem. But you did bring up another point. Anytime we're dealing with securities or any kind of like the TradFi regulatory world, and we are based in the United States. We have always followed, probably, been more prudent than we should have, but we're still here after, that's been live for 5 years. So we've been kind of ups and downs. And Will was at the SEC before he was at JP Morgan, and
Right.
so we have always followed, been very regulatory compliant. But the decentralized bit is that there's always gotta be some sort of centralization when you're dealing with securities. So not necessarily other projects, but there's gonna be kind of KYC, AML, always there. So, we are the tech layer though, and so we would like to kind of encourage people to come to the ecosystem so that can continue to build and grow.
Yeah. That makes
But
sense.
it's a balance, it's absolutely a balance, like, there needs to be some sort of permissioning, but then you still want it to be public because there's benefits for the public.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a little bit case specific, um, but yeah, the DeFi is, I do think there'll be some regulated DeFi. We have a project, with a regulator that we're working on to show regulated DeFi. We're working with regulators as well
Mhm.
too. We're also working with the GBC and figuring out how can we help educate to grow, to show that we can do this in a compliant way. But that is not our main focus. Our main focus is building out and working on those 3 clients.
Yeah. Regulated decentralized finance sounds kind of ironic, right? So how would that kind of work?
It's there are some regulators that are interested and that appreciate DeFi, and it's really identification. It's really kind of going through the ID of who you are
So like
prior to
KYC,
trading.
KYB, all
Yeah,
that.
it's
Mhm.
KYC granted.
Yep, that makes sense. What do you think the future of DeFi will look like? It's obviously at the core of, I believe, every blockchain and the crypto ecosystem as a whole. But then there's also the side of like TradFi bridging into DeFi. So I think there's a lot of work that's been done on the DeFi front. You brought up lending and borrowing and other categories, and then we have like DEXs and the
Mhm.
ability to bridge money from one chain to another. And we could go on and on about like different like DeFi primitives. But what do you think the future of it will look like compared to where we are today? And what would you like to see
Sure.
done? Yeah.
So if you think about it's easier to get a wallet than it is a bank account, especially in countries outside the US. So we're a little privileged, I think,
Right.
just where we sit, that we have a stable currency and we have other opportunities and we have kind of money in the bank. So I do think that this industry is incredibly global. So I think sometimes, especially with my kind of Wall Street hat on, if you have blinders, you're missing out on a huge world outside there. So I feel like there's huge opportunities kind of for the retail world. I just got my deck redone. You can kind of see it in the back. Um, and I wanted to use DeFi for it. I ended
Go
up
on.
not because
Yeah.
we didn't have we didn't have our lending protocol set up yet. But the reason I wanted to do that was I wanted to show like average people like me, like Gen X, right? Look what you can do, right? It's a very standard, and just so people get more comfortable with it versus the idea of like, oh, it's so far unknown, I don't know what it is. But if you think about what DeFi is, it's kind of, it's peer-to-peer lending, say, right? And so it's really being able to find alternative sources, or kind of, y banking without the centralized body. Um, but but I do think there'll be so many great opportunities to do that, be it when, with different collateral, right? Didn't Novogratz do the violin or something of the like, or guitar or something?
Did he?
Like the idea of tokenize this is a while ago.
Right.
Like being able to use those tokens to borrow against, right? And I think it just makes the world much more liquid and fast. So I do think also the world, if you think about the private credit market really is the same as DeFi. And there's different rules for lending than there are for securities, for example. So I feel like there's a little bit more flexibility when you're in a lending environment. So I really do think that is going to grow. I think it's really right now it's the anonymity of it. I'm going to say that word wrong, but like it's just it's the kind of the know your customer world of how can we do this. But I think there are going to be ways to show that you are not a bad actor, but you're not necessarily disclosing your name, that we're gonna be able to figure that out. So, I think there's a lot of tech that we haven't developed yet that we're working on, so kind of different privacy perspectives we can work in DeFi, that we'll be able to kind of continue. Like, think about, mortgages, like, when do people borrow money, right? I think credit cards are a little different, but we're getting there if you think about stablecoin and what Visa and Mastercard are doing, right? And they're paying attention because it eats into their business, right? Even, you know, it, blockchain could eat into banks' business if you're thinking about how it decreases, like if we're getting rid of middlemen and different fee lines, but everyone's paying attention because they'd rather get in front of it than be behind.
Yeah.
Like it's the Kodak and Blockbuster, right? Like we're so great, but we need to figure out what's coming next.
Yeah. Do you think we're in our blockbuster days, or we're moving on to Netflix?
I don't think okay, so Netflix this is funny. In business school, I valued Netflix, and I didn't think it would do that well, and it has done incredibly well. But at the
It has,
time, it
yes.
was going it was
Mhm.
going it's different. It's a different business model that I didn't envision, so I always go back to thinking about this. I couldn't see, like, I had blinders on, and I couldn't see where the world could go. And it was because you were discs that you took to the mailbox, and I was like, "I hate going out to to have to go mail something."
Right.
But obviously, it evolved from there, right? And so this is what I constantly am trying to think of is, like, where are we going as opposed to where are we today, because that's what's important.
Mhm.
And there's certain things I think of, and there's loads that I can't. So that is why I think it's super important to, like, continue learning and listening and, like, conferences and dinners, and it's,
No, I
just
agree.
talking with people about getting everyone's, let's work your friends are all smart people and you
Mhm.
choose the people you're with, right? Or like your colleagues and what have you. And so I really enjoy um trying to stretch my brain a little bit.
Has there been anyone recently who has said something to you where you're like, "Huh, I haven't thought about that."
Yeah. I feel like all the time. I go back to when I was writing the book, Chris Dixon had just come out with a book and
Mhm.
his was really focused on the internet, like this being the next internet. And I'd never thought about that because I generally thought about finance, right? I didn't think about all the different aspects. And that was really an eye opener for me. I'm sure there have been others more recently, just even like sitting and listening at conferences
Right.
about
We were both
um
at ECC recently, last
yes.
week.
Christine Moy, who I think is amazing, had
Yes.
said that in all of her experience, no one's using it to save money, right? All the back
Huh.
office functions. And so that to me was an eye opener because I feel like people are or they're trying to do. But that makes me look at things a little different and dive a little deeper.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, there's things all the time that come up that make me think, "Oh, let me think about that." Or there's like new technologies for stablecoin ideas, and so now I'm like, "Okay, let me dive into that." Or partnerships. There's so much M&A going on right now. And so then it's kind of like, "Oh, what am I missing because I didn't see that coming?" Or the usability of things. Yeah, I the more I know, the more stupid I feel, right? The more I think I know
No.
less.
No, the more you learn is the takeaway from that, yeah.
I know. But I'm like, "Oh, I didn't get
Yeah.
that."
No,
So
it's always great to hear other people's perspectives. I mean, that's one of the parts I love most about this job. You brought up M&A.
I love this industry, like, I get really
Mhm.
excited about what we can do and where we can go, so I get really jazzed up. But sorry, go
Same.
ahead.
No, 100%. You brought up M&A, and I feel like that's a super topical. space right now in crypto, more so than ever. We're seeing like
Um,
Robinhood even acquire things, Coinbase is acquiring things, other ecosystems are as well. Do you think about the M&A market much for Kadena, or is that not really of top of mind right now? You rather just have like people come in rather than you like buy and bring them on.
I will tell you I do. I absolutely think about where should we be going, and what would make sense.
Mhm.
So I am definitely open to things that are strategic, and that we could bring in. But I also try to remember that we are the tech layer, and so when we're bringing in something that's the tech layer, are we, how are we adding value to our multiple clients? We are I also am thinking about those revenue generating opportunities, and that is probably, like, a little over here in a different entity, but absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we have to, right? We have to continually thinking about how it's going, but I do think this world is always gonna be a bit M&A oriented because I don't think institutions and larger companies that have big checkbooks are going to be developing innovation within their walls. I think it makes more sense to buy something that exists. And I think what we're seeing right now is a lot of consolidation generally among crypto companies, right? Which totally makes sense, right? It's kind of like we've all been focused on different things and how can we come together to do that?
Yeah.
So I'm super excited about what all of how all of this plays out. Um, yeah. I also look at Washington, DC and what stocks people are buying. And so it's
Huh.
really funny. That's one of my latest things, right?
What are they
And
buying?
so it's
Yeah. So give us the alpha. Yeah.
Coinbase, Robinhood, Circle now, and the Bitcoin ETF.
So they're in.
All of
Yeah.
those t and even there was even a DeFi there's even a DeFi public company that they have bought, and so, like, they're obviously investing in it even if it's not necessarily coming through, but
That's so
I just look at
interesting.
kind of like trends, right?
Yeah.
What can I learn?
Does that influence you in any way?
I might have
Not
followed
financial
some of
advice, yeah. But
I might have done that, and yes, it absolutely was helpful.
Mhm. Very
Um,
interesting, yeah.
it's
I'm
just,
Yeah. It's always good to, like, kinda track what other people are doing, I think, smart people, and then also just, like, the general temp of what's going on in the ecosystem, but yes, do your own
it's
research to the listeners, yeah.
It's also diversifying, right? So, because we're all so crypto, and so it's interesting to me to see, like, how the public markets are starting to look at crypto, right?
Yeah, yeah, I
It's
think the
crypto.
perception has changed so much
Ah,
too, you know?
yes, absolutely. That's where I'm seeing it, as most people that work at banks can't invest in anything, the Washington, DC can, and they're the ones that are creating regulation now, so
I mean, you've been in this space for a little while now too. I'm curious, as someone who's like building out an L1, what do you think about the other L1s in the space? Like, what are they doing right? You can name names or not, and like, what is also on the flip side not necessarily the best move that you're seeing other L1 foundations and teams get wrong?
Sure. There is a lot to we have a lot to learn. So, and we're also on the smaller side. So, looking and seeing kind of how they build and grow. I do think I do think there will be multiple L1s. I do not think there's only it's like a one wins all. I think there'll be kind of different needs for different things. I feel like, Solana has a different group of people than necessarily Avalanche and different people have different opinions, which is great. But I feel like there's, where are kind of TradFi going, where are meme coins going, where's gaming going? I feel like there's a lot of different kind of niche opportunities that people are creating. One, I feel like what for me when I joined, it was what influences how are cryptos valued, right?
Mhm.
So that is something that I still work with, and seeing what's been successful for other L1s just from even a building perspective, right? Like what has generated a lot of interest. I really look at how do we do TVL, even though because we're a proof of work, so it's not as straightforward, but we're looking at different opportunities there. Also, totally within regulation. And how do we reach more people? How do we attract the developers? So that's a big focus right now is focused on bringing more developers in. Um, so we're doing like we hadn't done booths before, hadn't really done the hackathons, and so we're working on those. We're also focused on, like, for me, it's like geographies. We're global. What makes sense? Like, what market should we work on? So we've got a really active community in Turkey, for example. We don't have as many active communities in Asia, and so we're gonna be spending a lot of time in Asia this year. Reach out if anyone wants to talk. Right? I feel like it's that of, like, where are we finding opportunities? We're finding a lot of opportunities for on the tokenization side, like the lab side in Europe, because they're a little further ahead with regulation, and so they're building a bit more, and there's a lot more AUM I found from some there. So anyway, lots I'm excited to kind of see where we go and how we grow. That I feel like there's a lot to do. You had asked about other layer ones. I love what Provenance has done, right? And Figure, I mentioned them before, right? They created something with community banks that was able to offer a project. I mean, there's a lot of private chains that have been around before that really, at the time that was the thinking, but it's harder now. Now that the world is going a bit more public, which I look at always as the intranet of the internet, right? I feel like the intranet is the starting, and the internet is really where you go. But people were concerned about that before, and so I feel like that's a little bit of the private chain versus the public chains. I do think different permissioning can come in, so different opportunities, different privacy. Um, I know a lot of money has been out there raised for L1s. We haven't played in that. But there's a lot of, like, the idea there is obviously there's huge expectations for growth. And so
Right.
I
100%.
do want everyone to do well. Like, I'm all about, like, the team. I think a rising tide
You're
lifts
one of
all
the
ships.
nicer ones. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I feel like we can learn from everybody, right?
Yes. No, I agree.
So, that's always how I look at it.
Mhm.
Even not every project's successful. I admitted that I had a failed startup initially. But, you've gotta give it the go. I laugh, I say, like, I'm a cockroach, as in, like, I just keep going, right? I'm not
I love
dying.
that. That actually
Just
kind
keep
of segues perfectly into the question that I always ask guests at the end is like, what would be a piece of advice that you would give to the listeners from your time in this space? Not that you're a
Sure.
cockroach, but like maybe what's something you
Cockroaches
tell
per se.
yourself that like keeps you going, you know?
So I'm really excited about where we can go, is just understanding, like, I do a lot of research. I just look it's just fun, right? I feel like I'm passionate about this, um, and just continue to educate yourself, because there's always more to learn, right? I try to be very open that I love people's feedback, whether I agree with it or not, but I just, like, I'm not always gonna be right, and I'm gonna learn by surrounding myself with people who question me.
Mhm.
So I like that. I would say choose your crowds, because if you surround yourself with, like, in people that you find inspirational, that really benefits you too. So that's what I would say. Like, gotta be careful with toxic people, because that just brings you down. But I would say just keep going, right? Just keep going. Put yourself out there. It's not easy. Like, when I have been to so many networking events, like, especially when you're starting and you don't even know anyone, just go out there and shake hands. We're all people, and we're all looking to build something kind of greater.
Mhm.
And there's a lot that comes along with that too. I do love being around all the innovation of, like, oh, I didn't think of that. Like, that makes total sense,
Yeah,
right? Um, so that's what I would say. I would just say, like, stick with it, and learn a lot, and surround yourself with interesting people.
I love it. Amazing. Annalise, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. It's been so fun.
Yep.